build homes, fix the budget, and lastly, bring down crime. That's what we're going to do. That's common sense.
Happy New Year, Madam Speaker. And it is 2024, and this Prime Minister is still not worth the cost. He's not worth the crime. He's not worth giving up the country that we know and love. But after 8 years, everything costs more. Crime is running rampant. Housing costs have doubled. The country is more divided than ever before, and the Prime Minister seeks to distract and attack anyone who disagrees with him in order to make people forget how miserable he's turned life in this country after nearly a decade in power. Our common sense counterpoint, though, is very focused. In this session of Parliament, we will fight to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Again, yes. In case you missed it, axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime. Axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime. That's how we're going to turn around the mess the Prime Minister has created in 8 years. Let us quickly touch upon that mess. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, housing costs have doubled. This is after he promised that those housing costs would go down. In fact, they rose 40% faster than incomes. The worst gap in the G7 by far, the second worst among all 40 OECD nations, twice as bad as the OECD average, with roughly a quarter of OECD countries actually seeing housing affordability improve over the last 8 years. Here in Canada, under this Prime Minister, we have seen them worsen at the fastest rate in the entire G7. He has created a situation where only 26% of Canadians believe that are able to afford a single family home. It now takes 25 years to save up for a down payment on the average home for the average Toronto family. 25 years used to be the time it took to pay off a mortgage. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, it is now more affordable to buy a 20-bedroom castle in Scotland than a 2-bedroom condo in Kitchener. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, a criminal defense lawyer reported on Twitter that numerous of her clients have asked if she could help extend their prison sentences so that they don't have to go and live in the housing market and find a place to rent. In other words, this Prime Minister's housing market is worse than prison by the judgment of several people who actually live in prison. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, we have seniors crammed 16 into a 4-bedroom home in Oshawa. That's according to the food bank, who told me they had to house middle-class seniors together. They're all losing their homes because of this incredible rent increase that this Prime Minister's policies have caused. We have homelessness is skyrocketing across the country. Every town and center now has homeless encampments. Halifax has 30 homeless encampments, 30 for one medium-sized city. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, who would have imagined that we would have 30 homeless encampments in one city? But that is the misery that he has created through his policies that are not worth the cost of housing. Meanwhile, he makes the problem worse. He gives tax dollars to incompetent mayors and bureaucracies to block home building. The worst incompetence, of course, has been the mayors of Toronto and the former mayor and the present mayor of Toronto, the former mayor of Vancouver, blocking construction in those cities and making it uninhabitable for many of the people who should be able to afford a home. We now have the second slowest building permits of any country in the OECD. That's why we have the fewest homes in the G7, even with the most land by far to build on. And we were told that the media darling Minister of Housing, who was brought in fall, was going to fix all this. He was going to hold photo ops right across the country, and all of a sudden there would be more building. What happened? Housing construction actually went down. 7% reduction in housing last year under the leadership of the current housing minister. But is it any surprise that when you put the guy who destroyed our immigration system in charge of housing, you get a destructive result. And don't, it's not me accusing him of ruining the immigration system. It's his own Liberal successor. The current Liberal Minister of Immigration says the system is out of control. In his own words, he claims that his predecessor was giving study visas for students to come and study at what he calls puppy mills. Those are his terms. I would never have used that term. It's insulting. They're actually human beings. They're not dogs, Madam Speaker. But that's the language we get from the current immigration minister to describe the chaos that his own predecessor caused in the international student program, the temporary foreign worker program, not to mention countless other programs that have been now overwhelmed by fraudsters and shady consultants and bureaucratic incompetence. Now they take the guy who ruined all of that and they say, this is the guy we're going to bring in to resolve the housing crisis. No wonder it gets worse and worse by the day. With their only defense is that they're spending lots of money. Wow. Failing is bad, Madam Speaker. Failing expensively is even worse. And that is what this Prime Minister has done after 8 years. It is not only in housing, it is in generalized inflation. After 8 years, inflation hit 40-year highs. After 8 years, this Prime Minister has increased the cost of food so quickly that there are now 2 million Canadians, a record-smashing number, who are required to go to food banks in a single month. We have students forced to live in homeless shelters in order to afford food. We have seniors who say they have to live in tents in order to be able to shop and feed themselves because food prices have risen so high. In fact, in Toronto, 1 in 10 Torontonians are now going to a food bank, enough to fill the Rogers Centre 7 times. If the monthly users of the food bank in Toronto alone were to go to the Rogers Centre, you'd have to fill the place 7 separate times just to accommodate them all. Who would have thought that you'd have this many hungry people in Canada's biggest city, a city that has elected no one but Liberals since 2015, and this is the result they've gotten from it. In that same city, crime and chaos rage out of control. In the adjoining suburbs, now we have stories of extortions where small businesses receive letters that if they don't fork over big dollars to international crime syndicates, they will be shot at, their houses will be burned, their families will be targeted, and the government does nothing to protect them. Who would have thought that Canada would be so vulnerable to this kind of criminality and chaos, that these foreign criminal syndicates would think Canada so weak and so easy to target that they could go after innocent small business leaders and their families in order to shake them down for money. And yet that is what has happened. And these same business owners go to bed at night with one eye open because they know their car could be stolen as they sleep. I told some stories yesterday to the caucus, incredible stories of people in Brampton whose cars just vanish in the middle of the night. Then they go over to Montreal, where they're put on a ship and sent off to the Middle East or Africa or Europe, where they're resold at a profit. And they're not even inspected as they go onto the ships with these containers. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister spends billions of dollars trying to buy back the legitimate property of licensed law-abiding firearms owners. He believes that the problem is the hunter from Nunavut or the professional sport shooter from Nanaimo, when in fact the real problem is the